Welcome back to The Liberty Perspective. I'm Joe Marshall. I don't know if you can see her though. See me, P? Can you say hi, kid? Need a mini Peter back here to bring you some more. Last show, I kind of finished up on going over Michelle, the woke anti-wokeism of Melissa Chen's defense of the Enlightenment against the Enlightenment. I don't know. I don't get it. But anyways, I want to continue where we left off on that, as far as where the whole evolutionary science, the whole evolutionary, premise, the whole evolutionary narrative fits into the whole Darwinian narratives, fit into the collectivism. Collectivism becomes evolutionary or is evolutionary, how that fits into Marxism, how that Marxism fits into the science that we know today because of the transfusion back and forth. I guess you could call it an inclusive science because it includes the Marxist social policies of world socialism, or maybe not just Marxian elements or tenets, but the tenets of collectivism, be they Marxian or not, essentially. Marxism just happens to be the most popular world socialism on the table today. It's the most popular world socialism on the table today. The whole battle between the war on the main stage in the world today is no longer between the freedom and liberty of individual rights, liberty, freedom, or the founding principles of America, our republic, or the free society that it ordained, where the individuals endowed by our creator's rights and liberty are secured by limited government. It's no longer a battle between that concept, at least in contemporary politics or geopolitics, especially. It's now the battle lines now are drawn as you read more of this. I get more into the research of the doctrine and the white papers that are all written out there in academia. There's so much of it out there. Once you start digging into the right holes, you start it's there. It's always there, but these people talk between themselves and nobody else is paying any attention to what they're saying and doing, is what it amounts to. But that battle between the main battle and war, if you will, is no longer between collectivism and individualism. It's between the multitude of factions of collectivism, of world collectivism, world socialism. You've got the world socialism of kind of the United Nations world socialist, global governance, intergovernmental agencies, kind of led by the United Nations, and intergovernmental global governance, with the United Nations kind of at the center of it, the government's at the center of that world socialism, that world communism is what it is, and the world socialism of the more fascist, private, if you will, stakeholder model world socialism, fascist stakeholder model, because it's like fascism, it's all winds up being like a public-private partnership kind of a thing between the private stakeholder model of the World Economic Forum, and their Great Reset, because that's what it is. So you have the UN-centered model of world communism, socialism, intergovernmental, New World Order versus the fascist model, more fascist model, world socialism, stakeholder model, World Economic Forum, private Great Reset. So either the more technocratic Great Reset, right? So either way, the world socialism wins, whether it's a governmental run, UN centered, or it's a private run, and UN just being like a stakeholder among the governments, being stakeholders among the stakeholder model. This is where we're at, and I'm going to be getting more into that in the next couple shows. But between what we've been going over with Melissa Chen's defense of the Enlightenment, the Promethean Enlightenment, where we have learned so much since the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, kind of like the Humanist Manifesto says, where we've learned so much that not only do we declare that there is no God, we have become our own God. And that Promethean, the fire of the knowledge, the morning star, if you will, that comes down with all the knowledge for us to emancipate humankind from the eternal ignorance and slavery that God left Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So there's some two different ways of looking at things, and this is where the Enlightenment comes in. The Enlightenment sees that whole scenario of the Garden of Eden, instead of leading to humanity's original sin and kind of mandating a humbleness and trying to be a better person on this earth for a better afterlife. There's no humility to it whatsoever. We just need to emancipate ourselves from that slavery, that eternal slavery. As a matter of fact, like I said, not only is there no God, we are our own God now, because we've learned so much and we know so much that we're just going to take over the evolution of everything, including mankind, from this point forward, to correct all the mistakes of nature, or being that there is no God anymore, it's just nature, right? We're going to correct the mistakes, and we're going to not only adhere to that evolutionary, we're going to capture it, we're going to own it, and we're going to direct it from here on out. And, Harari at the World Economic Forum isn't the only guy saying that shit. I mean, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. But we kind of went over, we went down through this. Where are we? I kind of left off here. I thought I had this all ready to rock and roll. There we are. We went over Melissa Chen's deal in her video. We've kind of finished that up a little bit finally. Kind of started into this deal, and I left off here in this Darwinism and critical theory, the connection between Darwinism and critical theory, because as we know, critical theory, what that is it's the vanguard, the spear point of the evolution. It's putting all things critical of the society targeted for destruction out there. All things critical, and only all things critical. In this case, the society targeted for destruction is basically America, because there isn't much of America left that even represents what the Western free world was. Maybe on the surface, but when you dig into it, there isn't. I don't know. Do people realize it? Do they care that what America was founded as is gone? Do they even care? I don't know. But just in case, somebody's interested in it, I'm going to put this information out there so that you'll know that what I'm saying isn't bullshit. I'm not making this shit up. I'm trying to get the information out there for your consideration. That's it. That's all I can do, Then I can sleep at night because you got the information. Darwin and the critical theory, the connection. This comes from 2021 out of scienceandculture.com, which, if you look into this, you'd probably find that it's some kind of collectivist socialist magazine anyways. Out of that article, okay? Read you a little bit of this so we can get into it and kind of decipher what's going on. At Mind Matters, neuroscientist Michael Egner offers a brilliant summary of critical theory. Critical theory. It's Marxist in origins. But if you call it cultural Marxism, as I guess some whacked out people like, I don't know, maybe the LaRoche might have called it that or something. Some whacked out people called it cultural Marxism. So they said it's conspiracy theory. But critical theory is real. It's actual. It's doctrinarily Marxist. It's Marxist doctrine put out there to disrupt the normative. You should read it all, but don't miss this explanation of how phenomenon connects to Darwinism. And this is one of the things we need to understand, is how this whole evolutionary science thing, biology thing, plays into politics, plays into the social, and how vice versa, how the social plays into our understanding of science, biology, medicine today. Because they're inseparable. 2020 was the year that critical theory came to dominate culture in America. This was written in 2021. It ruled academia for a half century, but only in the past year has it become to rule the American public square as well. Yeah, it's been in academia for a long time. And mostly an anarchist, communist, socialist doctrine, revolutionary doctrine. You know, but it's now mainstay. It's mandated through critical curricula, critical pedagogy. If not mandated, it's still at the forefront of education, K through 12, and academia, not just in the ivory towers. You should call them scarlet towers because they're all red. But anyways, yeah, perhaps you're not interested in critical theory, but critical theory is interested in you. And this is one of the main points why I'm reading this to you. Critical theory is interested in you. You know, it behooves us to understand it better because it will be a central theme in American culture for the foreseeable future. There is this isn't coming from right-wing platforms. This is coming from the people perpetuating and pushing this shit. Yeah. Because it will be the central theme in American culture for foreseeable future. There is a connection to Darwinism at the heart of it. The cultural hallmarks of critical theory, political correctness, vigilance over microaggressions, cancel culture, and the like are weapons in this war to rearrange the structures of power. Correct. That's what it is. To be an agent of the revolution, agent of change, is to get a critical awareness of the society that you're in, of all things critical. Then you get a critical conscience, you understand, which is the whole woke thing, right? You get the critical conscience, and then from your critical conscience, you're driven to go out into the public sphere and become agents of change, to disrupt the normative and become agents of change. So it's all right in line with everything that I've come to see and understand in doctrine over the past 20 plus years of reading it. You know, intersectionality, which is where the connections of the tenets of the revolution and critical theory to how it pertains to every aspect of our society, every aspect of our way of life, every aspect of our culture, in order to disrupt it, cancel it. In order to disrupt it, dissolve it, deconstruct it, and ultimately abolish it. Intersectionality. It's a whole science of its own, you know. Intersectionality is essential to the coordination of struggle because it brings together victim groups to apply maximal pressure at culture's weakest points, at our culture's weakest points. At every fissure, at every crack, every divide, if there is one, there will be a wedge driven into that to split it apart even farther. As Alinsky said, rub raw the sores of discontent. Yeah, rub raw, the source of discontent. Right. What difference has Darwin made? Strange as it may seem, evolutionary theorist Charles Darwin played a central role in this drama. Karl Marx himself credited Darwin with much of his basic insight into human history. Marx wrote to fellow communist theorist Frederick Engels, co-author of the Communist Revolution, by the way, that Darwin's theory provided the basis in natural history for our view, unquote. Marxism is economics read in tooth and claw, okay? So to speak, cultural theory is cultural, read in tooth and claw. Darwinian natural selection applied to cultural change. This is the whole thing. This whole natural selection of Darwinian evolution is applied to cultural change. And that's where Marxism kind of takes over the Darwinian evolutionary narrative, not to so much as to incorporate Darwin's evolutionism, but to get Darwin's evolution, an evolutionary narrative, to incorporate Marxism, the tenets of Marxism, the tenets of socialism, the tenets, the collectivist tenets, and secular collectivist tenets of the Enlightenment. In the end, you know. But you've got, yeah, Marxism is economics, red tooth and claw, so to speak. Cultural theory is cultural, red tooth and claw. Darwinian natural selection, which is evolution, applied to cultural change. So you take Darwin's evolution, apply it to cultural change. But when you do that, that was one of the things that, you know, this whole Lysenkoism thing. Lysenko was a Marxist that incorporated the tenets of Marxism, which in Marxist revolution, if you wait for the gradualism of Darwinian evolution, which was kind of like it was Lamarckian, and then there was this Lysenko, which was a derivative of Lamarckian, you know, where like if giraffes stretch their neck enough, they'll eventually get longer necks, as their environment has an effect on the genetics, right? The environment. Well, Marxists are going to want the environment to have effect on everything. That environment being social environment at the preeminent, you know, preeminently anyways. So you're going to have the social environment as the environment that is the epigenetic or post-genetic influence upon genetics and evolution. It's going to have that same influence on biology as it will social revolution. And you can't have gradualist or gradualism of individual genetics passing down from person to person to person, which is like the Mendelian model. They refer to it as the Mendelian model. They want shit that's going to freaking what they refer to as the punctuated equilibrium of Stephen Jay Gould and a couple other guys or whatever. But they want that punctuated equilibrium, which is a sudden jump from what we have today to whatever they want us to jump to, from the Western free world of America as founded today to socialism and a world socialism. Can't have this gradualist shit. Even though a lot of socialists and Marxists were gradualists, like the Fabian socialists, Antonio Gramsci, and even in some ways the organizer dude there, Saul Alinsky. He was worked from the inside out. He was kind of a gradualist. You got to accept the world the way it is today in order to change it. These guys are like, no, we're just going to change it. Because we don't accept the world the way it is today. You know? So, let me see. Just to kind of kick around some of these things that are involved here. Yeah. So he said that Darwinism is the naturalization of Marxism, and cultural theory. As Darwinism is to capitalism, cultural Darwinism is to critical theory. See, this social Darwinism, the evolutionary Darwinism gets broken up between all these evolutionary Darwinists to social Darwinism, which led to eugenics. Okay, like the strongest, or the strongest survive, the survival of the fittest kind of thing. And a lot of these guys applied it to, in a defense of capitalism, they said, or free enterprise, they said, they applied the secular Enlightenment collectivist ideas to the defense of capitalism, which is now social Darwinism. Not that I wouldn't want them defending that, because they will defend it on the premise of it being destroyed right there, right? And our founding principles, the same thing. You don't want a Darwinian collectivist defense of our founding principles, because once we stand for a Darwinian or collectivist or socialist or Marxist defense of our founding principles, then we've lost them. We've already lost them. It's kind of what human rights are. Once you defend human rights, you're defending human rights. You've already sacrificed or lost or thrown away your actual natural rights and liberty. And natural in this doctrine doesn't apply to like nature's law, like John Locke, or nature's law, or natural law. It doesn't apply to that. It applies to evolution, because natural law is evolution in this doctrine. They use the same words to mean different things. Opposite things, actually. So Darwinism is the naturalization of Marxism and cultural theory, as social Darwinism is to capitalism, so they say. It's a bullshit argument. Don't get caught up in it, because it's a lose-lose. Neither side actually defends capitalism. Cultural Darwinism is to critical theory, but if you call it cultural Marxism, it's a conspiracy theory. But they're saying here cultural Darwinism is to critical theory. Just pointing that out. But anyways, right here I got this star here on cultural Marxism and cultural theory. Marxism equals scientific socialism. Okay, this is what Marxism is. Right? Scientific socialism. And this is on Marxist.org. What I'm going to do here. Can you see that? It says Marxist.org, and here it's in Roman numerals. I got 17, scientific socialism, on Marxist.org. And this comes from this article here, basically, pointing that out. Marxism equals scientific socialism. Scientific socialism equals dialectical materialism, equals the evolutionary science of everything. Just
welcome back to the Left Library.
Just want to have you watch a little bit of this so that we can get this is the science of socialism, dialectical materialism. Just a few minutes of this.
The home of simple political theory. Today, we dive deep into dialectical materialism, often referred to as the science of socialism. We'll break down its core principles, such as the unity of opposites and the transformation of quantity into quality, and explain how it serves as a scientific method for understanding change in both nature and society. Stick with us as we uncover how Marxists use this powerful tool not only to interpret the world, but also to change it. Dialectical materialism is not simply a philosophy, but is described by Marxist theorists as a scientific method. What makes it scientific is its systematic approach to understanding change in the natural world and human society. Based on empirical materialism, which begins with the real, observable conditions of life, it uses the dialectical method to reveal how contradictions in those contradictions drive development. Marxists argue that these laws apply universally, both to nature and to society. The dialectical method relies on three core laws that define it as a scientific approach. These laws explain the processes of change and development in the world, allowing us to predict and understand how society, nature, and thought evolve. These core laws that we're about to cover in more detail are: number one, the unity and struggle of opposites; number two, the transformation of quantity into quality; and number three, the negation of the negation. Number one, the unity and struggle of opposites.
The negation of the negation. The negation of the negation, which is Marx, right? And you got to have the negation of the negation, which is, who's the negation of the negation guy that's out there? What, James Lindsay? Is that his name? James Lindsay? The new atheist, gone right-wing anti-communist, right? That is all the rage on all the medical freedom platforms, right? But anyways, you kind of get the idea. Marxism as the scientific framework within which not only to understand the world, but to transform it. I'm not making this shit up. The framework. Marxism is the framework. Scientific socialism, scientific Marxism, okay? Cultural Darwinism is the framework within which we not only understand the world, that we are not only to understand the world, but change it according to the tenets of the socialist, Marxist, be it Marxian or not, revolution. Right? That's where we are. What difference did Milton make? You may be thinking that I've heard this before. If you've read Paradise Lost, you have Milton's epic recounts of the angel Lucifer's fall and his struggle to gain power over heaven and earth. See, I was kind of touching on this earlier. Is this freaking... Oh, shit. But anyways, to restructure reality and move himself up the ladder of power, it is the ultimate culture war. The analog between Lucifer's strife and the Marxist war for cultural supremacy was not lost on Saul Alinsky, like I said, who wrote his epigraph in his book Rules for Radicals. Lest we, I have that right here. And a lot of the newer versions of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, they've left this out. They left this out, where he quotes Thomas Paine, Rabbi Hillel, and Saul Alinsky's own quote in here. Lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical from all legends, mythology, and history, and who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which. The first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom. Lucifer. That's Saul Alinsky. I'm not making this shit up. Yeah, right? Doing the math. There are of course many ways to analyze cultural dynamics. A Christian analysis, for example, might entail a calculus of mutual love and sacrifice, the fruits of grace and redemption. Critical theory, however, is a calculus of power. The Marxist analysis, focused as it is on structures of power, undoubtedly has a satanic flavor, whether one understands satanic in the literal sense as I do, or as a metaphor for a Darwinian analysis of cultural red tooth and claw. Red in tooth and claw. Hang on a second. Just so Let me see. Let me see. What's the meaning of the phrase red in tooth and claw? Red in tooth and claw is a reference to the sometimes violent natural world in which predatory animals unsentimentally, cover their teeth and claws with blood of their prey as they kill and devour them. They got a picture of lions all red and blood in the face and everything. That's what red tooth and claw is. So that's where we're going. Okay. So the Marxist analysis, focused as it is on the structures of power, undoubtedly a satanic flavor, whether one understands satanic in the literal sense as I do, or as a metaphor for a Darwinian analysis of cultural red tooth and claw. Darwinian analysis of culture, red tooth claw. Predator-prey relationship, sinking your teeth and your claws into the blood of that culture. Critical theory provides a jobs program for leftist academics. Yeah, so you have the critical theory industrial complex, basically the woke industrial complex, right? Yeah. So critical theory provides a jobs program for leftist academics. There are innumerable PhD theses. There are innumerable PhD theses been written on the hegemony of transphobic intertextuality of microaggressions, and it is a prescription for perpetual civil war. That is what critical theory is. It's a prescription. It's a prescription for perpetual civil war. And that's what they're teaching our kids in school. If we are to avoid civil war, we need to understand critical theory and the subtle Darwinian ideology, the satanic ideology of struggle for power. And basically, it's the coming into fruition of the anarchist doctrine that also is derived from that same scenario. You know? So this guy's giving us a warning here. He's not, from what I'm reading here anyways, I'm not saying that he's a Klinghoffer. Yeah, he's giving us a warning on this. So that's why I got it on here. It's not clear exactly if he's given a backhanded, support to the whole thing of critical theory and cultural revolution, or not. I don't know. I have to read into it a little bit more. I don't know for sure. But anyways, the warning is there, and it's coming right there. I'm not the only one to see it. Critical theory provides a jobs program for leftist academics. It is a prescription for perpetual civil war, and that's my point. It's a main point right there. Cultural evolution per Wiki. Okay, now Wiki, I don't go to Wiki for much. But when I want to know what the main narrative is, what the narrative being pushed is, I mean, you just Google whatever AI's answer is, that's because they're the knowledge broker. AI is the knowledge broker. Wiki is just another knowledge broker of the central narrative. It's a knowledge broker of the central planners on behalf of the central planners for the central narrative. AI and WikiLeaks do the same shit. Cultural evolution, historically also known as sociocultural evolution, was originally developed in the 19th century by anthropologists. Let me see. Okay, there we go. Cultural evolution, historically also known as sociocultural evolution, we'll get to the dot in a minute, was originally developed in the 19th century, that's the 1800s, by anthropologists stemming from Charles Darwin's research on evolution. Now, these freaking anthropologists, I'm telling you right now, there's Zygmunt Dobbs has written a couple different things regarding Harvard universities and other universities, and how anthropology is actually what led the infiltration of revolutionary, collectivist, Marxist, communist, socialist thought and the tenets of the revolution into academia, and anthropologists are central. We're central to that. So, I mean, just another thing that kind of pulls things together. Yeah. There have been a number of different approaches to the study of cultural evolution, including dual inheritance theory. This is a cool one. It's all Wikipedia. So we're getting the central narrative on this. Social cultural evolution and memetics. Memes. Okay? Is it memes? I think Richard Dawkins, the new atheist guy who wrote The Selfish Gene in the 70s, that finally was able to emancipate Melissa Chen from the central dogma of the creation story, right? Memetics. What are memes? What are memes on Facebook? Are they kind of things that spurs, an evolution in social thought on all the different social media platforms? Memes get spread around, and kind of as they just get put out there, they kind of, whether they're funny or not, they kind of, people get to see a perspective through memes that might have effect on how people see things, see other things, right? But anyways, cultural evolutionism and other variants on cultural selection theory. But anyways, I got some marks here, asterisks here, double asterisks, triple asterisks. Okay, regarding the social cultural evolution, origins of social Darwinism. See, Spencer introduces principles of social Darwinism. Okay, Herbert Spencer. This is kind of the guy of the founders of social Darwinism that they say led to the bad part of the Enlightenment and bad part of collectivist thinking and centrally planned society thinking and the utilitarian thought process of communist, socialist, whatever, fascist, nationalist, collectivist, socialist society does, right? Herbert Spencer. This comes from this article right here. Herbert Spencer, an English philosopher from the 19th century, is best known for his adaptation of Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection to human societies. That's where it starts, right? I don't know. Marx was doing the same shit. Herbert Spencer just did it too, right? But this is kind of where the doctrine gives credit to Herbert Spencer, where the science of evolution is transformed into the social societal evolution of social cultural evolution. Right. And is best known for his adaptation of Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection to human societies, which is termed social Darwinism. And then you have this break between geneticists, and you have this break between, evolutionary theorists and collectivist thought processes and the whole secular humanist enlightenment-based intelligentsia, okay, that are out there today. You have this back and forth between the social Darwinists that they say leads to the eugenics of the Nazis, and also a defense of capitalism, or the Marxism or socialism that is against the capitalism. So that's where that back and forth, the dividing line is right there. This is kind of where it starts here. Herbert Spencer. Spencer's philosophy proposed that social evolution mirrors biological evolution. Important aspect to understand here. Marx see the same shit. Marxists see the same shit. That's why they want to incorporate the whole punctuated equilibrium, that giant leap forward shit, kind of Mao named his freaking giant leap forward or his leap forward freaking thing. And they didn't make it up out of thin air, Spencer's philosophy proposed that social evolution mirrors biological evolution, suggesting that certain individuals and societies are more fit, survival of the fittest, and therefore better suited to thrive in a competitive environment. They say that also the social Darwinism is what leads to scientific racism, which they blame on capitalism, which they blame on individualism, which they blame on, kind of like America's whiteness and white supremacy, which is actually of and born of the progressivist, collectivist, socialist doctrine that's targeted it all for destruction. But they fight amongst themselves and blame the mutually targeted society for everything that they're fighting over. It's projected onto America, America's founding principles, our founding republic, our way of life, free enterprise, property rights, that kind of thing. They'll blame racism on that, which is all what critical theory does, critical race theory does. Critical race theory is just an aspect of critical theory at large. He introduced the phrase survival of the fittest. That came from Herbert Spencer, which was also adopted by Darwin himself. Later came to be adopted by Darwin himself. You don't get to see that very often anyways. Yeah. To describe his concept positing that those who dominate in society do so to their evolutionary advantages. So if you're a dominating person, if you're a dominating race, or a dominating culture, or a dominating nation, or a dominating whatever or whoever, you're doing so because of your evolutionary advantages in the evolutionary survival of the fittest. That's what social Darwinism is. Right? Let me see. Yeah. Yep. And Spencer himself was influenced by the scientific theory of positivism, which is based on the principle that only empirically verifiable phenomena can be known. Only verifiable empirical phenomena can be known. We have to be able to detect it with our five senses. It's an existentialism kind of thing. That's what existentialism comes down through the Enlightenment. From the Enlightenment, that if it exists because we can detect it with one of our five senses, right? Otherwise, it's metaphysical, or just some kind of a ghost that doesn't exist, or a fallacy, or superstition, like God, or faith, or souls, or any of that kind of stuff. Okay, now I've got this hashtag for this number sign here just to go over what this theory of positivism is. And the theory of positivism comes from Auguste Comte, which is a guy that I continually bring up because a lot of this stuff that I go over all goes back to Comtean principles. Everything, even the early internationalists, scientific internationalists that got together, like pre-post World War I, pre-post World War II, the internationalists that got together because they wanted to internationalize or globalize science. They were doing it based on Comtean principles. secular. Where humanity becomes the great being and the source of all morality. Altruism, which is where the individual's life doesn't mean jack shit. It's your individual duty, which goes back to like what? Kantian shit out of the Enlightenment. It was where, your duty as the individual to just basically throw yourself under the bus. That's where the only moral thing that you can really do as an individual is throw yourself under the bus for the greater good of the collective. That's why you're here. That's why we're here. It's our moral duty, right? So that all goes back to the same shit, positivism, and that the whole thing is this whole argument between the new atheists and Brett Weinstein. The argument between the debate, the limited spectrum of the debate between the atheists like Brett Weinstein and the atheists like Richard Dawkins, and the other new atheists like James Lindsay was, right? So you've got this debate between them. And the excuse that Brett Weinstein comes up with, as a defense against the secular atheism or humanism of the new atheist movement, well, you got to understand it. I'm an atheist, right? And I understand this whole thing is because you got to give these Christians and you got to give these people who believe in God and have faith, and you got to give them some grace, because the only reason why they believe in God is because it's an evolutionary phase. It's one of the 3 evolutionary phases as proposed originally by Comte in his positivism, 3 phases of human societal evolution. The first one being we believe in multi-gods or, multiple gods or whatever. Then we go to a monotheism where it's just one God. And then we finally realize that all gods are bullshit and that we are it. We're the one, man. We're it, It's humans. I mean, we got this, right? So when Brett Weinstein argues or pushes back against the new atheism of Richard Dawkins, he's using the same Kantian principles to push back against it, where the whole secular thing is where the great humanity, the great being, becomes the source of all morality, and right. So he's pushing back, saying, "Well, you got to just give him a break because it's part of their evolution." It's not his idea. He doesn't say that he got that idea from Comte. He doesn't say that he got that idea from positivism. He just says, "Oh, come on." He talks like it's his freaking idea. I don't know if anything he's ever said has ever been his own thought process. That is derived from his own critical thought process. Not meaning critical theory thought process, but the old-fashioned critical thinking process where you take all information and decipher it and think for your frickin' self outside the guardrails of the central narrative and central dogma of collectivism and collectivist doctrine. But anyways, so this theory of positivism, which Spencer was influenced by, right? He's the one who came up with social Darwinism. He was influenced, again, goes all back to Comte. Is all I'm trying to point out here. The theory of positivism, primarily developed by Auguste Comte in the 19th century, emphasizes a scientific approach to understanding social phenomena. Comte argued against speculative theories about humanity and instead advocated for observation and objective analysis as the foundation for knowledge. Objective, my ass. Right? His framework is rooted in an area of 3 historical stages of human understanding: theological, metaphysical, and positive. Let's see. Which later represented a reliance on the scientific inquiry to uncover the laws governing society. a scientific inquiry to uncover the laws governing society. Well, isn't that Marxism? Wouldn't that be Marxism? Comte classified science in a hierarchy, placing sociology. This is the other aspect. This is the other aspect of Comtean theories and Comtean philosophy that a lot of people, forget about. This Comte classified sciences in a hierarchy, placing sociology, as the pinnacle, as it integrates insights from other disciplines. They call it the queen of all sciences. He coined the term, just like he coined the term altruism, he coined the term sociology, which is the social control, central social control of the knowledge passed down that's derived from all the different sciences, including math. There's a hierarchy to all the sciences. Math, biology, doesn't matter. Psychology, all of it gets filtered down through the planners. And they get to determine what, if anything, is going to be utilized out of that to further the needs of the planners, and therefore the evolution of human society. I shit you not. If that's not maniacal genius, I don't know what is, right? Oh yeah, this is cool shit. Yeah. Okay, this dual inheritance theory. This dual inheritance theory that we were just touching on here, I mentioned a little bit on that. This dual inheritance theory, wiki again, historical development in 1876. Frederick Engels, this is the main narrative. Now, this is what they want you to know. That 1876, Frederick Engels wrote a manuscript titled The Part Played by Labor in the Transition from Ape to Man, accredited as a founding document of dual inheritance theory. The approach, so Engels, again, they're admitting, is the source of this dual inheritance theory that which is one of the main studies of cultural evolution. Okay. All right. It goes back to Engels, the co-author of the Communist Manifesto, by the way. Yeah. So in this, the approach to gene culture, the gene culture coevolution, first developed by Engels and developed later by anthropologists, which again were integral in the infusion of collectivist tenets, properties, and revolution into academia early on, as documented by Zygmunt Dobbs in his number of his extensive works, naming names. Okay. Oh, Pete, what you got, kid? Huh? Come here. She wants to come up. Come here, kid. Oh, I know, baby girl. I know, kid. I know, kid. What's going on? But anyways, she gets kind of bored with this shit. But the approach to gene cultural coevolution, gene and culture, gene and environment. Okay, that's the Lamarckian, would be a Lysenkoan, right? Type shit, right? Epigenetic type shit. They're not saying that, but I'm just pointing out the correlation. First developed by Engels and developed later on by anthropologists, is described by Stephen Jay Gould as the best 19th century case for gene culture evolution. Best 19th century case for gene culture coevolution. The idea that human cultures undergo a similar evolutionary process as genetic evolution also goes back to Darwin and Comte. Right? Memetics. I'm going to have to touch on this here. for Stephen Jay Gould. I kind of touched on him a little bit. He's the guy who came up with the whole social Darwinism thing. No, punctuated equilibrium. He came up with a punctuated equilibrium. Memes, memetics, okay? Memetics is a theory of evolution. Memes comes out of the theory of evolution of cultural based on Darwinian principles. Memes. The ones on social media, they're memes, right? Memetics. With the meme as a unit of culture, so each meme that goes out on social media, if you looked at it like a microcosm, a micro snapshot, if you will, of a cultural moment of time, right? You could see it as that. The term meme was coined by biologist Richard Dawkins. Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, you know, the new atheist guy that Brett Weinstein argues against, who was who was able to finally emancipate Melissa Chen from the whole central dogma of a creation story. Right? But anyways, it all comes back together, right? It all comes full circle. Just pointing it out here. The term meme was coined by biologist Richard Dawkins. Is it a coincidence? In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene. To illustrate the principle that he later called universal Darwinism. Universal Darwinism, just Darwinism applies to everything. Everything. Right? All evolutionary processes depend on information being copied, varied, and selected, a process also known as variation with selective retention. Selective retention. Selective retention. The conveyor of the information being copied is known as the replicator, with the gene functioning as the replicator in biological evolution. Dawkins proposed that the same process drives cultural evolution. Same gene process drives cultural evolution. Okay? Got to remember the contention between the genetics, cultural evolutionary people, and the I don't know, Marxian science of Darwinism. But they're kind of pointing this out here. Dawkins proposed that the same process drives cultural evolution. He called his second replicator the meme, citing examples such as musical tones, catchphrases, fashions, and technologies. Like genes, memes, think of the meme on social, think of the memes on social that get passed around on social media, right? I don't know. Does it fit? You know? Like genes, memes are selfish replicators and have casual efficacy. In other words, their properties influence their chances of being copied and passed on. Okay? Some succeed because they are valuable or useful to their human hosts, while others are more like viruses. Just as genes can work together to form co-adapted gene complexes, so form groups of memes acting together co-adapt means, complexes, or memeplexes. If you understand everything according to the memes, all the different memes, then you have a memeplex. You have a memeplex included, among many other things, language, traditions, scientific theories, financial institutions, and religions. Dawkins famously referred to religions as a virus of the mind. A virus of the mind. And that would be collectivism. Secular collectivism would then be a virus of the soul, would it not? Right? Anyways, that they deny exists, right? I'll be right with you, kid. We're working on this. We're working on this, Pete. There you go, Pete. We're going to wrap it up here in a minute, Pete. Yeah. Dawkins proposed that the same process drives cultural evolution, and he called this second replicator of the meme. Yeah. Virus of the mind. Dawkins, the selfish gene explained. I kind of get into the individual here. I got a video here. The individual organism is a throwaway survival machine for the self-replicating code information which it contains. Yeah, Dawkins also said, he's the guy who said that basically it isn't us that matters. It isn't people that matter. Maybe we'll check this out here just for a second here.
Yes, these are pajamas with your pet's face printed on.
The gene is immortal. In fact, a publisher once, when I showed him the first couple of chapters of The Selfish Gene, said you shouldn't call it that, you should call it the immortal gene. And perhaps I should have done. Genes are immortal in the sense that the coded information they contain is reproduced, is replicated with almost total fidelity, significantly, not absolutely total fidelity, generation after generation after generation, such that there are genes which are identical to what they were tens of millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago in a few cases. So genes are immortal, not the DNA, of course that's not, that turns over in a very short space of time, but the coded information is potentially immortal. And that means that the difference between a successful gene and an unsuccessful gene really matters. It's going to matter for millions of years. So the genes that make it through those millions of years are the ones that are good at it. And good at it means good at building bodies, good at controlling the processes of embryology, to make bodies which have what it takes to preserve those genes and pass them on. And so I use this phrase survival machine. A body, an individual, is a survival machine. And that's by far the most powerful way of interpreting what an individual organism is. An individual organism is a throwaway survival machine for of interpreting what an individual organism is. An individual organism is a throwaway survival machine.
A throwaway survival machine. Essentially a meat suit, basically, right?
For the self-replicating coded information which it contains. And the fate of that coded information is crucially bound up with the fate of the body in which it sits. If the body in which it sits dies before reproducing, then that coded information is not going to go on the next generation and the next, and potentially for tens of millions of years. So the genes that are in the world today, distributed as they are in bodies of millions of different species, are here today because they were good at what they did in the past. They've come through a literally unbroken line of successful ancestors, where unsuccessful non-ancestors have been littered by the wayside. And so the genes in a swallow or in a kangaroo or in a hedgehog or in a human are all very, very good at making swallows or hedgehogs or kangaroos or humans. They had to be good at it, or they wouldn't have come through the generations today. Now that, I think, is an inspiring vision, and that's what fired me up about the very idea of the selfish gene. When I first read Hamilton, and then when I wrote it down first in my lectures, and then in the selfish gene.
So the idea, the genesis of the idea comes in the mid-60s from Bill Hamilton, and then it sort of lies not ignored, but not really researched further. And then some people like Bob Trivers picks it up.
Yes, I mean, actually, to be fair, I mean, it's inherent in the neo-Darwinian synthesis of the 1930s, actually, in Fisher and Haldane. And Hamilton particularly applied it to the problem the relationship between kin, between. But it wasn't only kin that inspired, which goes back to the 1930s, I think.
Well, you get an idea. You know what I mean? Where this guy, it's all about the genes, It's all that matters is the gene. The genetic coding that we're just meat suits, we're the throwaway survival machine. But anyways, it's a little bit different than, the sanctity of the individual in individualism or our founding principles, where, the dignity for the individual is inherent to the philosophy, It's just basically every individual on a multitude of levels, be it social or scientific, is basically meaningless. It's just another layer of the meaninglessness of the individual coming from the secular collectivism, secular socialism, secular whatever, enlightenment. The whole interview, it came out of a whole other interview, but anyways. For an interesting and somewhat Darwinian libertarian twist on social Darwinism, on the social Darwinism of Dawkins' selfish gene. It comes out of the Mises. The selfish gene, social Darwinism, and human cooperation. This comes from the Mises Institute, where Jeffrey Tucker says he's a Mises. He says he's a Mises libertarian. Rejects social Darwinism as it has nothing to do with Darwin or his modern apostle Dawkins. Dawkins has stimulated me to show how potentially the phonetic effects of cooperation could coherently link biology with economics. This is a magnificent thing coming from the Mises, von Mises. Where Robert Malone spoke in defense and platformed the anti-capitalism or of Naomi Klein, disaster capitalism of Naomi Klein, and some other kind of capitalism, information capitalism or something. But anyways, data capitalism. Yeah. And his that I went over in the show that I did on the Psy War of the Psy War of the psychological warfare of Malone's Psy War or some shit. I did a whole show on that. But anyways, as if applied, social Darwinism, be it social, scientific, or economic, genetically or environmentally, be it by Spencer, Dawkins, Huxley, Marx, Hitler, Lenin, or Stalin, has resulted in anything other than the centralized totalitarian depravity and mass murder. I mean, when you apply any of this, any of this has all been applied, what have been the results are basically pretty much universal. In the end, I mean, we're going to get into it a little bit more as far as when polio. And we're going to get back into it because I've touched on the coerced Soviet virology already, and kind of the what looks to be and what has been shown to be the bullshit origins of the whole of virology, of the whole of epidemiology and jumping virology. The whole science is based on shit that. I went over that in a show already too, but I'm going to be getting back into that a little bit. And this kind of touches on that too here. But as if applied Darwinism, be it social, scientific, economic, hasn't led to all the same thing, which is basically centralized totalitarian depravity and mass murder for whatever reason, right? Simply put, there is no and can be no sanctity, intrinsic value of the individual for that matter, humanity at large in any aspect of collectivism, including the utility of Darwinian evolution, be it biological, cultural, or social, which only exponentially compounds if it's all about the genes, which only exponentially compounds if it's all about the genes. If it's only the genes that matter, and we and literally the whole of life itself are nothing but enslaved, dispensable, trial run meat suits of the only thing that really matters, and the only real supreme being is the mission or purpose of our genes. So we exist only to the benefit of the genes. We evolved only because the genes needed us. Basically, we're the host, the gene's the parasite, and the parasite needs the meat suit in order to reproduce itself. Is that what he's saying? Yeah, so if everything that Dawkins is saying here, how would it be any different to say that our genes are parasites, and that they are therefore the actual dominant species on our planet, right? And life exists only to perpetuate the parasite. So, whatever. But for pro-evolution arguments against the so-called gene centrism of these guys, see the work of anarchist Pierre Kropotkin, inspired biology professor Steve Davis here. Okay? The cult of gene centrism, which now you're going to get into that whole deal between Mendelian and Lamarckian, I guess. And don't forget that whole, the synthesis, as they call it, or modern synthesis, or new synthesis between that Lamarckian giraffe neck stretching environmental epigenetic evolution and the Mendelian gene based Darwinian evolution, that contention between the two. Yeah, so, but you've got this pro-evolutionary arguments against the so-called gene centrism, okay, of these guys. See the work of anarchist Pierre Kropotkin, inspired biology professor Steve Davis. For more on Kropotkin's mutual aid, a factor on evolution, see Marxist.org here. A factor on, this is Pierre Kropotkin. Peter Kropotkin, this is back in 1902. This is on Marxist.org. I'm just trying to point out that all this doctrine, anarchist doctrine, Pierre Kropotkin was an anarchist. A communist anarchist, maybe? I don't know. He was an anarchist, right? And it all comes down through the same Darwinian evolutionary shit. It's all attached to the same shit. All attached to the same enlightenment. Right? Just as evolutionary biology genes are themselves doctrinarily fantasized, secular progressive concept originating in collectivist doctrine, proven real only in Darwinian central dogma, or collectivist doctrine, of a captured centralized science proselytizing the evolutionary basis of that doctrine. So too is the altruism of evolutionary cultural social genes coming to be first fantasized, then proven in the same progressive way. So a lot of these things are fantasized in collectivist doctrine, and then they come along to be proven in science or biology or genetics. the conversation, which is, you know, a leftist progressive central narrative, central dogma pushing, you know, media, right? Where does altruism come from? Discovery of the greenbeard genes could hold the answer. This is from 2019. So it's not that freaking, you know, this is just recent shit, right? This is coming to the forefront again. And a lot of this shit has been pushed to the forefront since COVID. Not a coincidence either, which we'll be touching on too. This is this article here. Where does altruism come from? Discovery of the greenbeard genes. Okay, the last few years have seen the emergence of research into one possible explanation for altruism. You know, throwing yourself under the bus for the good of the collective, right? Living for the sake of others, not for yourself, right? One possible explanation for altruism, a special type of gene, altruism gene, that was originally suggested as a hypothetical thought experiment in Richard Dawkins' 1976 book, The Selfish Gene. Okay, the discovery of real examples of these so-called greenbeard genes in microbes is helping change how we think about the origins of altruism. So now they're going to say that altruism is genetic. We have altruism genes. You know, and there's this classic example out there of this altruism of a jay or a bird who calls out the alarm for the good of the collective, but opens himself out to be targeted, exposes himself to the danger of a predator or whatever, to sound the alarm for the good of the collective. And again, Brett Weinstein, I've heard him use this exact scenario, if you will, in his talks, like as if it was his own thought process. It's just, but anyways, it's third grade level shit. Listening to that guy sometimes, it just seems like, I don't know, because not because he's not spewing things that are third grade, but his ability to soak it in and come up with his own version of it. Which, it isn't just him, it's the whole of academia, from a liberty perspective, or from my perspective anyways. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get how any of it gets given any credit. But anyways, yeah, the greenbeard genes, now, first hypothetical, now they're being discovered as real. You know? Even the depravity of Pete Singer's Alinsky-like World as It Is, ethics in which bestiality and pedophilia are morally justified, are all derived from some derivative of Darwinian evolution, not to mention altruism of the gene. This is Corey Bernardi is right in Peter Singer's Anti-Human World. But anyways, yeah, there you have it. You know, regarding Stephen Jay Gould, again, I'm going back up here to this. Stephen Jay Gould as the approach to gene culture coevolution, first developed by Ingalls and developed later on by anthropologists, is described by Stephen Jay Gould as the best 19th century case for gene culture coevolution. So we're going to go down here and pick up on what Stephen Jay Gould is, or basically touch on an expansion on what Stephen Jay Gould is, an appreciation of Stephen Jay Gould, found at where? Marxist.org. Where else, right? Okay, Marxist.org. Gould's thinking about science was deeply infused with his humanist and socialist commitments. Throughout his life, Gould continued to participate in socialist forums such as the annual Socialist Scholars Conference and events at the Brecht Forum, on whose board he served, including the meeting of the 150th anniversary of the Communist Manifesto. Gould was a dulcet and urgent voice on our side, Marxist.org. He will be missed by all of us who strive for a world free of oppression and exploitation. Isn't he the guy who coined survival of the fittest? Survival of the fittest. Herbert Spencer did that. Herbert Spencer did that. Oh, you crizap. Hang on a second. I just hang on a second. There we go. Okay. There we go. I'm back. Lost it for a second. But anyways, there's where we are. Dual inheritance theory, gone over that. Richard Dawkins, kind of going over that here a little bit, just applying some things here, just throwing it all together. So bringing all these different things into the fold so that we can see where they play into the bigger fold is what I'm trying to do here, you know. Gould was a redulcent and urgent voice on our side. He will be missed by all of us who strive for a world free of oppression and exploitations. Stephen Jay Gould. He's the guy who came up with punctuated equilibrium. Right. But Brett Weinstein's Cultural Evolution's shamanistic updates. Another one of the things he talks about are these shamanistic updates. Updates, which I showed you some other like New Age guru was saying the same shit. I went over that on a couple shows ago. Brett Weinstein, Heather Heying, Atheism Has Failed the West. At 2 minutes in, 2 minute mark, can religions of the world bring themselves up to date and modernize? At 2:15, ancient religion text as both a compendium of wisdom. Religions are a compendium of wisdom. That's not his original either. I mean, I've seen it all over the place. And the production of evolution built by an evolutionary force. Production of evolution built by an evolutionary force that is not up to date by modern circumstances is what he says. This is, let me just show you this video.
You're not a child, you're a man. So stop wearing so many layers to go outside and get the bearskin.
The new realities.
Yeah.
You could make the argument that Christianity itself is a shamanistic update to Judaism. So where are we? I think we are in the moment where we cannot embrace the orthodoxy so absolutely that we abandon the obligation to figure out how to modernize these traditions. We need the shamanistic element. It is that moment, and if we don't do that part, we may save ourselves in the short term, but do ourselves in the long term.
Shamanistic updates. So, you know, God needs an update. Religion needs an update, man, and to make it more compatible with the, you know, secular collectivist world that we're transforming into. Yeah, so I've got this at 320. No hope for humanity unless we are careful of our embrace of tradition, not fit for the 21st traditions, not fit for the 21st century. You know, like property, individualism, and traditions. At 14 minutes, Brett and Heather both completely stumped by the question, asking them to explain the equality of human dignity in the absence of God. This is actually pretty funny. I'm going to go back and watch this. 1400. You got to see this.
Where
Brother Mandelbrot, dignity of every one thing we're not equal dignity. How do you measure it? Well, we can't. So okay, well, great, but that sounds like nonsense. So that's my long-winded answer to your question. I mean, you can react however you see fit to my diatribe, but my last question would be, as in this whole conversation, as biologists, as people that study evolution, how do you understand the justification for the equal dignity of every human being?
I don't know how to answer that last question.
I don't know how to answer that last question. If you can only put crickets in there, right? You only put crickets in there. It was actually kind of funny. Did you see that? At 1727, regarding Christianity, is itself an evolutionary shamanistic update to Judaism. That's I just showed you that one part. And it says, no, nothing new here from Brett Weinstein. Religions as a belief in God, creationism itself being an evolutionary phase humanity must traverse through on its evolutionary path toward the eventual end and of the wholly centralized single scientific global secular human organism, again Comtean, okay, is a fundamental constant in the enlightenment of evolutionary secular philosophy dating back through Herbert Spencer's social Darwinism to the positivism of Auguste Comte himself, as I pointed out here already. Just a reiteration of that. It's all the same shit. It's all the same shit. And the philosophical connections. This is just another reiteration of. You can go here, and this guy goes down through. He does a really good job. Pointing out what this guy Anthony Harris Barabit, his philosophical connections. He goes down through the whole thing of Comte here, and there's a couple different things in here that are important to know. Here's the three theological stage. This is the period of when the early man, after the animalistic or fetish stage, sought to find ultimate causes a phenomena in the decisions or wills of superhuman beings, and later of only one such being. The metaphysical stage. In this stage, man no longer thinks in terms of supernatural personal God, but on the abstraction, such as all-embracing nature, and looks to such notions as either vital principles, forces to be explained phenomena. And the positive stage, explaining the final stage, is supposed to be founded by bringing facts of experience under general descriptive laws. These are arrived at through a process of testing by direct observation. Verification shows the hypothesis to be genuine. Such laws will then enable man to predict and control nature, and to direct evolution. At a higher level, philosophy seeks to achieve a synthesis, there's that frickin' dialectal shit again, right, of all the sciences, which is sociology. Positive knowledge is only relative in that it is of the world as appearance, your five senses, existentialism. Positive knowledge through certain is only relative in that it is of the world as appearance, It is also confined to the phenomena. We can know nothing of any ultimate cause or metaphysical principles. we can know nothing of any ultimate causes or metaphysical principles. Comte's three stages are thus represented as a sequence of progressively more mature or sophisticated kinds of explanations of phenomena. Corresponding to each of these three periods are also, Comte says, three kinds of social organizations. But anyways, you got, he says, a new science of man will be required. This is a new science of man that's going to be required, okay? He says this is sociology. Again, the queen of all sciences is needed to formulate the basis laws which underlie human society, a knowledge of which will enable man to recognize society so that it will satisfy his needs and enable him to maximize his progress. I went over this. I went over this in this book that I published over 10 years ago now. It all ties into the same shit, is what I'm trying to point out. Let me see, what else we got? There's a couple things in here. Okay. Comte regards sociology as the ultimate synthesizing science. This is achieved by reference to the idea of humanity and human needs. Sociology determines each science's contribution in this respect. It gets filtered down through the planners, basically. He also distinguishes between social statics and dynamics. Social statics examines the general laws which relate to social cohesion and order. The later is concerned rather with what is needed for the development of order, that is, progress. We go from rule of law to order. Rule of law of our founding principles to the order of a centralized collectivism. Okay? The later is concerned rather with what is needed for the development of order, that is progress, as exhibited in three stages of social organization. Okay. Down here also another thing is, moreover, the historical laws themselves must be understood in the light of our understanding of human nature. Thus, while operating behind broad historical constraints, social planning is entirely possible and indeed required. So why wouldn't the social planners push a doctrine that mandates social planners? Why wouldn't they do it? Right? And if they're funding all the science, then the scientists are going to have to push it too, or they won't get any funding. As for the forms of government society should have, as the forms of government that society should have, Comte favored rule by knowledgeable experts, elite, right? Positive scientists and philosophers, the same shit freaking goes back to Plato, whose decisions, expertise through government would have to be obeyed by the people because the rulers know best. Yeah, it's intrinsic to collectivism. There is thus no place in a scheme for rights of individuals insofar as they are subordinate to society. Your rights are subordinate to society. You can't see or understand them, as Rousseau said in his social contract, outside the context of the duties you owe back to the collective in return for those rights, in which you are no longer to be the judge of the dangers to which you are to be subjected. Like when it's determined by the central planners that it's best for the collective for you to get the jab. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what dangers you're subjecting yourself to take that jab. You're going to take it because it's what's best for the collective. Because the central planners have deemed it what's best for the collective. And because of the moral altruism that you're obligated to in the social contract to throw yourself under the bus for the good of the collective. So there can be no collective right or human, even individual human rights, which are still collectivist rights. There can be no such thing as a collective, individual human right to not take the jab in this philosophy. It's impossible. I'm just trying to point that out. There is thus no place in this scheme for rights of individuals insofar as they are subordinate to society, indeed humanity as a whole. It is therefore only in this context which emphasizes duties, okay, that the concept of rights can have any application. Humanity, the great being, as I've said this before, takes the place of God and is the basis of all morality, is now the basis of all morality. I just want to point that out. You know, when I point all these things out, I'm not making this shit up. It's doctrine. It's doctrine. And it's the doctrine that all this, the same doctrine is all the shit's being espoused out of the same collectivism, out of the same secular collectivism. At large, it's all one collectivism. Collectivism versus individualism. All this shit falls underneath the frickin' spectrum of collectivism. The one evil on earth, if ever there was one. Because it sells itself. It sells itself. It sells itself as the freedom that it's actually targeted for destruction. And it sells freedom and liberty as actual slavery. It sells actual freedom and liberty as slavery and sells actual slavery as freedom. It's what collectivism does. It's what collectivism is. But because people get to vote money out of the pot, or they think they got something coming that's going to benefit them, like maybe a government program or something, they're going to freaking sign off on all the freaking, they're going to sign off on their freedom and onto the slavery because they've been seduced into it. You know, their greed gets you, you know, as it always has in humanity, right? But anyways, I want the law of three stages. Britannica goes over the same shit here, right? Kind of basically goes over the same shit. And back to Melissa Chen's alleged argument against the woke politics of Marxist critical race theory. Because you got to remember she's all in defense of the Enlightenment against Marxist theory, Marxist critical race theory, which are all derived from the same freaking Enlightenment. But anyways. Do you think it's a coincidence that this new brand of contemporary anti-woke determinists, there's another thing in there, that determinists, or as it were reductionists is another thing, like these social Darwinists are referred to as people that, you know, use evolutionary Darwinism to defend capitalism or whatever, right? Or individualism or scientific racism, eugenics, that kind of shit. It all comes from the same collectivism, but anyway, don't pay any attention to that. Those historically associated with the anti-scientific social Darwinism and the defense of capitalism, racism, and eugenics as the survival of the fittest. In other words, do you think it's a coincidence that these new brand of contemporary anti-woke determinists, or as it were reductionists, those historically associated with the anti-scientific social Darwinism, right, defending capitalism, and the defense of capitalism, racism, and eugenics as survival of the fittest? They're all associated with the survival of the fittest. The one thing I've always kind of enjoyed about progressives is that they love nothing more than to eat their own. That's the one thing you got. Every once in a while, you got to kick back and kind of enjoy the moment. Is this just another case of that Darwinists eating the Darwinists that begot them? Woke comes back to bite the Darwinists. Woke comes back to bite Darwinists, and they deserve it. Intelligent design people stood up not only for our colleagues and those who think as we do, but we also stood up for freedom of the people. But anyways, I just wanted to kind of point that out. I mean, it all comes back, you know. Or are they wittingly or unwittingly luring the right, be they creationists or evolutionists, right wing politics, or are they wittingly or unwittingly luring the right, the right, be they creationists or evolutionists, into aligning themselves, their cause, be it individual, like individual liberty or our founding principles, beliefs, and any arguments that they may have against the evolutionary Marxist anti-racism or critical race theory, into a trap of universally predetermined racist affiliation from which there is no evolutionary, biological, social, or political escape. The trap is set. If we fall into the arguments between these guys and we pick a side, we're picking a side that is wholly within the context of the Darwinian evolution, wholly within the context of the centralized, collectivist, centrally planned society. So once we pick a side in this battle between the social Darwinists and the Darwinists or whatever, okay, between the Marxists and the social and the gene Mendelian genetics, it's all the same shit, right? If we pick a side in that, then we've already picked a side that has we've forsaken anything to do with our founding principles, anything to do with the individual rights and liberty of our founding, or anything to do with the natural rights and liberty or unalienable rights and liberty enshrined in our Declaration of Independence and secured in in our Constitution and the Republic it ordains. We've thrown it all away if we pick a side in this, is what I'm trying to point out, okay? And once you're in it, there's no political escape into a trap of universally predetermined racist affiliation, okay? Scientific racism, from which there is no evolutionary, biological, social, or political escape. Because the only thing that gets you out of that spiral, that vortex into the abyss of the dialectal, in which truth is impossible, okay? In order to avoid that or get out of that, the only thing that can get us out are our founding principles of individual rights and liberty, individualism, the tenets of individualism, and the ability to pursue an independent happiness. That's why, you have to understand what's going on here between the two. That's what I'm trying to show you here. Is it a coincidence that most, if not all, of these new outspoken anti-woke, woke, anti-woke, are or have been longtime evolutionary leftist progressives themselves, right? I mean, these guys are all the rage on medical freedom platforms, and, true social platforms, on, Rumble platforms, and I don't know, Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, right? It's all you're going to see on there, and all the memes that are related, the related memes that come with it, the memes, right? Because they want to bottle that up and perpetuate that narrative through memes. I mean, does it make a little bit of sense on how the trap of what social media has become and the tools that they're using in there all fit into this Darwinian evolutionary frickin' science? I mean, there's no line that separates the two. They're all one. It's all one concept, all one doctrine, all one philosophy. Yeah, is it a coincidence that most, if not all, of these new outspoken anti-woke, the woke, are all former leftists or former whatever, Democrats, or the new Republicans, or the old Democrats, or the anti-communists were the old new atheists, like Melissa Chen. She was a leftist atheist right-winger. Okay, she's the leftist atheist right-winger now, right? Brett Weinstein, another leftist atheist right-winger. Jordan Peterson, leftist revolutionary traditionalist right-winger. Traditionalist? Traditionalist? Look up traditionalism, capital T. And you'll find Steve Bannon. You'll find people on the geopolitical stage like Alexander Dugin. You know? Putin's brain. Putin's Rasputin. The guy that was involved with, Unite the Right. He was speaking with these guys, Spencer, and he's speaking with all them guys. I mean, he's the guy that made that video in Trump We Trust at beginning of Trump's first, when he was running for president for his first term. James Lindsay, the leftist new atheist right-winger, okay? Anti-communist, new atheist anti-communist, whatever. Candace Owens, leftist right-winger, right? Elon Musk, liberal, Obama donor, right-winger, right? Right? Green New Deal guy, electric car guy, solar panel guy, who's making millions off the whole Agenda 2030, net zero, Agenda 2050, Agenda 21, sustainable development narrative of the left. He's freaking raking in all kinds of shit. He wouldn't exist if it wasn't for that government money. He wouldn't have jack shit. But he's the new right, man. You know what I'm saying? You've got Joe Rogan, pro Bernie Sanders right winger. Russell Brand, leftist right winger. He used to shit all over America all the time on all his shows. Dave Rubin, leftist right winger. Steve Kirsch, leftist right winger. Naomi Wolf, leftist Democrat, prominent Democrat, working for administrations, presidential administrations. I don't know if it was Obama and Clinton or what, or Al Gore or something. One of them she was part of. Naomi Wolf, leftist Democrat right-winger, medical freedom hero. Steve Kirsch, leftist right-winger, medical freedom hero. RFK Jr., leftist right-winger. Leftist right-winger. Barry Weiss, leftist right-winger. Tucker Carlson, liberal, Democrat, white right-winger. So this is who we have the hands of the political right wing in American contemporary politics has fallen to. This is where we are. And through social media, they've crowded out. You used to have flyover states. Now we got flyover everybody. We got flyover everybody everywhere, because the only thing that you're concerned about is who's on social media. The only people that matter are who's on social media. And if you're not on social media, you don't matter. And if you're not on social media don't matter. And what's on social media don't matter. It's a debate. It's a fight. It's a conversation that doesn't pertain to anybody unless you're on social media. And maybe it doesn't exist anywhere outside social media. But the problem is it's becoming public policy. It's becoming national policy. Is it a coincidence that the whole of the so-called anti-vaxxer medical freedom movement is made up of these same type of leftist, globalist right-wingers, that are supposedly, going to save our republic, right? That they're going to phoenix some shit out of freaking the communism and the collectivism and the socialist world order or Great Reset, depending on which side of that world collectivism you're on or world socialism you're on, right? Anyways, I just wanted to get this information to you, kind of finish this thought process out. and just kind of kick around some of these things with you, because it pertains to the understanding the bigger picture and what I'm going to be getting into again, too. That still is a spin-off on all this evolutionary biology shit, the ties between evolutionary science, evolutionary biology, and social evolution, and revolution. It all comes together. It all comes together as one, and it ultimately gets filtered down through the triple helix. Remember the triple helix? The DNA of social revolution of the triple and quadruple helix, where you put into the public-private partnerships of not, the DNA, biological DNA has a double helix, right, or whatever, or a single for RNA, right? So you got to have the double helix of DNA, biological, but to make it social, you get the third helix or the quadruple helix between government, science and academia, and the collective. The triple and a quadruple helix. But that's where we're going to take off from there. And because to understand how a lot of this comes down to this whole, again, going back to the Mendelian, the social Darwinism, the Lamarckian, Lysenko type Marxist-based, genetics and evolution, and the social Darwinist evolution of gene-based Mendelian type gradualist type thing comes into play more. More when you understand how the whole concept of Lysenkoism, which was born of Lamarckian, giraffes stretch their neck shit, right? Will eventually have longer necks, right? That's the environment, the social environment, the cultural environment, or whatever will have effect on the genetics. That's a kind of a Marxian thing that led into Lysenko, was of that Marxism, and I've showed that in the paper how they all tie in together. Lysenko, Lamarckian, in the whole punctuated equilibrium of Stephen Jay Gould, I think that's who it is, but that comes into play when you start looking at the history of Lysenkoism and how it played into Stalin. Stalin took Lysenko and he basically mandated Lysenkoism because it was Marxist. It was Marxist, fundamentally Marxism. Is Lysenkoism, you look at a lot of the white papers in academia today, they're always blaming. They're throwing Lysenko under the bus, that he's the guy who caused all the starvation and the bad farms and the bad farm crops all failed because of him. And China adopted Lysenkoism. Wasn't just the Soviet Union. Communism everywhere. The Soviet bloc, Eastern Bloc countries, China, it was all over. They all adopted this Lysenkoism. But was the crops that failed and the starvation and disease-ridden everything, that they're blaming on Lysenkoism? Is this just kind of putting something out there to fly cover for the actual communism and socialism that bred both Lysenkoism and all the revolutions and stuff that led to the totalitarian depravity that led to all kinds of horrors and murder? People were all imprisoned everywhere. On these farms, they were being run by prisoners and guards. They weren't farmers. They kicked all the farmers out. They got rid of the farmers and put them in prison because they were too bourgeois, the kulaks, right? Down in Ukraine, they were just deemed too bourgeois. So get them the hell out of here, the people that knew what they were doing, and put all these freaking prisoners from wherever they took them and put soldiers in charge of them out there working the collectivized farms. So was it really Lysenkoism, or is it just freaking communism and socialism that resulted in all that shit they're blaming on Lysenkoism? Now it's kind of weird too, is that we're going to be getting into it. There's a resurgence of Lysenkoism. All of a sudden, wow, we're finding that there might have been something to that Lysenkoism. There might have been something to it, man. There might have been something to Darwin's Darwin's theories that related to Lysenkoism and Lamarckian principles of environment and social. Yeah, it's all coming back. So that, and the other thing that they're doing is that they're flipping the script on Lysenkoism, and they're now saying that Lysenkoism is prominent. The Marxism and communism, Stalinism of Lysenkoism is now prominent in Trump. It's being projected onto Trump, America, Australia, and whatever's left of what used to be the Western free world. I shit you not. We're going to get into more of that on the next show. I thank you for stopping by the Liberty Perspective today. Me and the Mini P did our best to bring a decent show today, but getting into the weeds on some of this stuff, it seems like we're getting into the weeds on this stuff sometimes, even to me when I'm going down through this stuff, but I'm telling you, it all pertains. I'm just trying to get you to understand the bigger picture. And the other thing is to show that I'm not making this shit up. So thanks for stopping by again. I hope you got something out of it. I don't know. I just hope you got something out of it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next Liberty Perspective. Thank you.